Think about learning a language. Here we have a teacher teaching French in a classroom. What is more effective, to be totally immersed in living in the culture of France 24/7, or learning in a standardized way in the classroom? For me, it's always more effective to be immersed in the environment. And when we look at sports, it is always to be better to be immersed in. If you're a kid, if you're not a kid, futsal 24/7. Can you walk outside and play street ball nonstop? If you're only doing two, say, practice sessions a week with your team, and that's the only time that you're in a team setting making meaningful decisions on the ball, is 2 sessions a week enough to make you a great decision maker? Is it enough to give you great game intelligence? It probably is not. If the coach is doing isolated technical training during those 2 sessions a week, she's taking away from decision making time on the ball, which you can't get at home. Our standard view of education, and this is what we call this unschooling, is it's all about conformity. Can you memorize the material so you can get the grades, and then your data is looked at, and the data is used to justify where the school is rated. It's used to justify the teachers' jobs, and everything is rooted to conformity in order for you to pass the classes. There's no creativity that is really embraced and celebrated here. And when you think about, your standardized coaching courses, how much of coaching courses is about just regurgitating the methodology that they give you? And if you want to progress to the next course, hey, you have to conform to our ideas, and we have to see you apply our ideas to the way that you coach the game. And then even if it is not about conformity, we want to see that your method is changing behaviors in the field, and it's showing up in key performance indicators, where, to be honest with you, that could take a long period of time. That is not something that changes overnight. And again, now you are a doctor with a prescription saying, hey, we're going to change these key performance indicators. Well, you're looking at separate pieces of the game, where I would view it's more important to look at the whole overall than it is separate pieces. And remember, this is a dynamic environment here, where who are you playing against? Every single game is different. What are the tactics? So to pull out of that, whether you're going to pass a coaching course on key performance indicators, again, that debate could go on and on forever. There's been plenty of educators who stepped into the realm of invasion sports, specifically soccer, and tried to take education principles and put those into the world of invasion sports. And I would say you have to be very careful with that, because domains, the way you teach music, the way you teach math, does not necessarily transfer to the way that you would teach soccer, basketball, hockey. It doesn't transfer. And yes, you could break things down into little pieces. And if you're a math teacher, maybe there's only one or two ways to arrive at a correct answer. There's a million ways to arrive at to score a goal in soccer. So in the classroom, affordances, maybe there's two ways to solve a math problem. Does it really matter what the student's affordances are? There's only two ways to solve the problem. In a game of soccer, the affordances are so diverse, you can't, and especially in every moment of the game, you can't even comprehend what the possible affordances are of the players. So how can you take the teaching methods from math or another domain in music and apply them to a dynamic, chaotic game like soccer, which is so different? Invasion sports is so different than the classroom. Verbal feedback. So many times we feel that coaches have to justify their expertise. And a lot of that justification comes from verbal feedback. But I'm here to say that verbal communication is very, very limited. I can't express in words how it feels to hit the ball correctly on a shot. I can't express that. There are no words for that. So I give you an example here. This is plane spotters in World War II. The only feedback, because it's a very difficult job to understand by auditory, by listening to the sounds, what was an enemy plane and what was not an enemy plane. And the verbal feedback was simple, yes or no. That was it. And based upon that, people started to attune, right? Their search got a little bit different, even though it was auditory search, but they eventually got it. And yes, the verbal feedback was yes or no. It wasn't some long explanation, yes or no. The chicken sexters in Asia, they couldn't explain. They said, we can't put into words how to tell if a chicken at such an early age is a male or female. But it's just something that you'll pick up with simply a yes or no from an expert. So feedback in those cases, yes, it was important, but it was simply a yes or no. This isn't some extenuating feedback. And many times there's no feedback. So do you need to have constant feedback to learn? Absolutely not. All the kids who play all those hours of futsal, all those hours of street soccer in South London, all the kids from the proving ground who made the EPL, there is no feedback verbally in those games. There is feedback because if you do something and it doesn't work, that's instant feedback, right? Player knows right away, hey, that pass got intercepted. That's feedback. But there's no verbal feedback from a coach. I actually think that is quite overrated. I would say this, that tactically, I'm talking player development. Tactically, it's a little different. Once you get a player at a certain level and tactically you need to give specific instructions and convey specific ideas, okay, that's a little bit different, but also that's not forever. This is not rocket science. Once you give these verbal instructions and they understand what this flexible game model is, you don't have to go on forever. One part of practice that we never talk about is joy. So the kids got to have fun. And if you run these game representative training sessions where the energy is high and kids get to celebrate, they get to score goals, they get to have, you create these environments with no fear of failure. Joy is what keeps the kids coming back. I always say that adults ruin sports for kids because they focus on, hey, I'm teaching adults. You're not teaching adults. You're with kids. And even adults love to have fun. Nobody would play invasion sports if it wasn't fun. Are you granted the freedom to execute how you want to coach? Now, granted, I think there needs to be a connection between academic theory and your practice session design, and then that has to go into your tactics. But if you have a clear explanation and you could logically say, this is why I'm doing this, this, and this, good for you. You could coach any way you want to coach. And you know what? If key performance indicators were the holy grail, every coach who finished second place in the Premier League and down should be fired, right? Your training methods didn't meet the key performance indicators. You didn't win. For me, it's a bit of nonsense. This is an example I always give. This is the MLS final, right? This is Columbus against Seattle or something. And this is just kind of a slide on, I want people to open up their minds. They score 2 goals. Columbus scores 2 goals against Seattle to the back post in the final, and they win the game. And my point is, if this was a regular match, Seattle would have automatically gone back to the training pitch and run their defensive organization training session, whatever. And it would have been the same old, shift right, shift left, step, drop, whatever it is. You have to look at these things in a much different way. You have to really look that the center backs didn't scan. Everybody didn't look over their shoulder. The right back was new to that position. He was late in recovery. All these things were going on. So would this kind of defensive training session that they've gone over every single week for the whole season, does it lose its value? Absolutely, it loses its value. I would have the center mids, the center backs play center mids to increase their scanning frequency. I would have that right back play center back to feel what it's like to not have a right back recover. Then I would have the right back say maybe every time they lose the ball, he has to delay his recovery run by 5 seconds to keep these people under pressure, to make them feel what that feels like. I would have that team have to overshift to one side of the field to feel what it feels like to be exposed on the other side of the field. It brings awareness. It brings a new perception, right? You want them to perceive differently. It could change their attunement just because you're not doing the same old session. Now, if you're being judged on that, someone's going to say, oh, this is crazy. What is this guy doing? Don't get stuck in the ways that you were brought up, because every coach normally coaches the way that they were developed. It doesn't mean it's the right way, and it doesn't mean that there's not a better way. So this is my last example of unschooling, right? This is a popular thing. Everybody loves data. And I remember listening to a couple coaches talk about, they film every training session, and the most competitive players are rewarded with playing time, and they just, whether it's 1v1, 2v2, 5v5, they take all the data of who won the most games. And I'm saying to myself, okay, that's a lot of energy. And you have to say to yourself, do you want to soak up all the players' energy day after day after day, worrying about winning? Does that eventually take an effect? How does them knowing that their data is being collected and starting lineups is influenced by whether they won a 2-on-2 game, a 3-on-3 game, a 5-on-5 game? I would say maybe that's not so healthy. They're going to start to play more conservative. They're not going to want to take risks. Maybe both teams start to sink into a lower block instead of opening the game up and start to explore all these options that they have if they open the game up. You have to really think about what are the effects of your action as a coach, both psychologically, tactically. How does this affect each and every player? So now that we spoke about academic theory and how that relates to training session design, in my sport specifically, like, how do I carry out my training sessions? So I have self-organizing possession exercises, which are, there's no positions. Players have to recognize the spaces on the field, say if they have the ball, that they need to get to, whether it's a regular field, small-sided field, so they can circulate the ball more efficiently. Maybe if they lose the ball, they have to understand, how do we get a little bit more compact to press and win the ball back? Then we have positional exercises where everybody on the field has a set position, and that allows us to move the ball fluently. And players can rotate a little bit in those positions, but generally positional exercises are exactly what they are. They are positional. Then we have phase of play, which is really tactically. This is how we're going to play the match on Saturday from a tactical perspective against this other team. Every exercise is fraught with constraints. So whatever I want to constrain the exercises for, when I constrain, it's still in game representative settings, right? So the information is real, the decisions are the decisions are real, but they're constrained. And they're constrained for reasons of, maybe we're looking to change their perception, to change their actions tactically. Maybe it's developing technique. Maybe it's developing general game intelligence, whatever it is. Overload training is something that taxes the brain, which we haven't really gone over. But basically, overload training is having to deal with all these different stimuluses. And then when you take them away, the game becomes a little bit easier. Differential learning is basically, everybody has a stability of motion. So if you're used to the stability of motion, I try to get you out of that stability range to explore different options. I'll give the example I give is, Peter Cech. He's saving ping pong balls from machines going 100 miles an hour or whatever. He has to contort his body in different ways that he would not have done if it was just a regular soccer ball. And when he gets on the regular field, he says, I've made saves on the regular field, 11v11 game with a soccer ball, that I used the movements that I used to save the ping pong balls because I was able to explore those movements. That's differential learning, right? He's applied something that he got out of his range of stability, because when you get out of the range of stability, you always want to come back into that range. But in differential learning, it gets you to explore outside of your stability range. And that was the Peter Cech analogy. And, this is pretty simple. I've changed this a little over time, but I basically have a color-coded system where it's very complex. The Blue Days, it's not game model. It could be game model, but it doesn't have to be. You could score to zones. You could have no goals. You could score to goals. You name it. It could be 5v5 plus 3, tons of constraints. So it's not how we're going to play the match on Saturday. It's more challenging decisions under all sorts of different environments. But again, the information is real. It is game representative enough to be impactful on the player's development. Red is pure out tactical. This is how we're going to play the game on Saturday. This is our tactics in the match. And that's when, yes, more coaching comes in. That's more direct. The red days are less guided by the coach and more dictated by the coach. But it really honestly depends on how flexible your game model is. Green days are fitness days, but I always work fitness in game representative training. So it's very, very seldom that fitness is isolated away from our game representative training. Yellow day has become differential learning day. I have it as game review. We always game review, but differential learning is really on Fridays for me. So that's how I work this into my own methodology. But I think you have to realize that there's two things in invasion games, because invasion games are about exploiting time and space to score when you have the ball, and shutting down time and space so the opponent cannot score and you want to win the ball back. For me, those are the only two principles of play that I focus on. And we can talk about why that is. Coach, how come the principle of width, the principles of depth, and I really do not see that much value in that. If you look at Fluminense play, what is their width? Those players can do things in small spaces that you could say, okay, they only need 20 yards of width, where another team is going to need 45 yards of width to have the same effect to keep the ball and circulate the ball. These are very flexible principles. You could say to me, maybe defensive balance is something, a principle of play the team always has to keep in mind. But for me, exploiting time and space and shutting down time and space, this is what you can spend your whole entire career as a player learning how to do better and better and better. And it doesn't confuse the kids. And for me, you just want to attune your players to these things, to these two principles: attune and guide in game representative trainings. Tactics, for me, game models, tactics, all this kind of stuff, you have to say two things as a coach. One is, how rigid do you want to be, or how flexible do you want to be? Do you believe that your players could have better solutions than the game model? If you do believe that, which I do, you need to give them freedom to make their own decisions on the field. If you become a dictator and tell them, if you're the number 6, you need to switch the ball side to side every time, you're basically affecting their perception in a way where you're taking out affordances. You're taking out perceived affordances, because the game model has taken over their vision because you as the coach are so rigid. Look at the Red Bull game model. The Red Bull game model absolutely takes over players' perception because it's so rigid. Get the ball forward, get it into the target strikers, counter press off the second ball, keep the shape narrow so players are always around to counter press. We don't care how the ball gets up the field, just get it up the field so we can counter press and have scoring opportunities. And, multiple people pressing. The reality is you've changed perception. And by changing perception, because you influenced it so much in a game model, you've taken away perceived affordances, you've taken away real affordances, because the game model is so strict. I would never want to play in a game model like that. But let's also say it's one thing if you're a professional player, it's another thing if you're a kid. If you're a kid, now if you're going to play the Red Bull game model since you're 11 years old, I'm sorry, you're stunting your development. It's impossible. Of course, you could still be a good, talented player, but you're not having the option to explore, to come up with your own failure, and then to think about it, and then to make changes in your game. You're exploring nothing. You're exploring nothing because the game model is too rigid. Very dangerous to do with young players. Again, a game model you could think as a membrane, a very flexible membrane where players can come up they all understand that they are together in this with a central idea, but there is a lot of freedom, and the freedom is based upon individual affordances. You cannot tell me that you know what Messi can do on the ball in every situation on the field that he gets the ball. It is impossible to say. And not just Messi, any player. No coach knows. And that's why I'm saying, even when you construct your game representative environments, maybe you can have flexible constraints where if a player is able to bend it and they have special ability, let them do it. It's a flexible constraint. An example of that is the fast area, the box on top of the box. Normally that's a one-touch area, but what if you have somebody who's special? Okay, say it's a one-touch area, unless you think you could do something special. Then you could take 3, 4, 5 touches. When we think about other games, this is like an invasion game compared to golf, right? Golf is much different. You say, oh, but golf, you're just swinging a club. Isolated rote training loses value after a certain extent. So the old, hey, I'm going to practice for 4 hours straight on the driving range, is that really effective? I would challenge that notion that that's effective. In golf now, they've started to do things like, hey, you're going to play all 18 holes using only 4 clubs. Figure it out. Figure out how to use that as a constraint. And then it makes for a better golfer. They're adapting their movement solutions. They're adapting their swing because they only have 4 clubs. Maybe you say, hey, no shot is allowed, no approach shot is allowed to go onto the green. So now you're constantly working from areas off the green, and it's changing your perception. Really, really good ideas, other than just, hey, we're back in the 1980s where we're just going to get a bucket of balls and hit the balls. So I'll come and end with this. You always start with the whole. When I'm planning out sessions, I don't have time frames, because what if this exercise is going great and I want to let it go for the next 15 minutes? Let's do it. What if I want to make changes right away that weren't in my original lesson? Great, let's make the changes. How am I supposed to come to training sessions with pre-planned coaching points? That doesn't make any sense to me. I want to be in the current feedback loop in the environment with the players. I don't want to come with pre-planned things. It's going to skew my perception. So my point is, I can go anywhere I want depending on what I see in front of my face. So do I need to plan out the entire week? I want to have a rough idea, but I need to stay flexible. 2 weeks? Oh, for me, 2 weeks is too much. I don't know how you could plan for a month or 3 months or 6 months or 10 months. Maybe you can have a very basic outline, but when I see these coaching charts with all these different colors and we planned out 10 months of periodization, and I get these phone calls from pro clubs who say, yeah, 3 months from now, we're going to play a scrimmage, but I need to know because we're planning our periodization for that week 3 months from now. I don't know. I think that's crazy. It's okay to have an outline, but for me, that's not floating the boat. I need to be able to make changes at will at any time. Yes, I can have a general idea, but for me, it's about being in the moment. So with all the periodization, the data, all that kind of stuff, honestly, great. I'll take a look at it, but it only matters to me about in the moment. My players walk off the bus and I had something planned and I think their energy level is low and I want to get them going. Maybe we can go into something really competitive right away. Maybe my energy level is going to go through the roof. Maybe the way I engage with them is going to be much more, hey, how you doing? Slapping hands, doing this, because we need to get the energy level up. I didn't have that on my plan. I had some other warm up on my plan. Well, I just scrapped it because the current feedback loop said I needed to scrap it. So I don't want to be this guy who is a prisoner to my plans and my color codes. My general ideas are there. I understand how I make up a week. I understand the exercises. I understand the methodology. But I have to be flexible.